Well, hello and welcome to the Media Roundtable Special Edition. We have a very special show for you today. That's why we use the word special, and I just used it twice. I'm here in what's normally sunny Los Angeles, but today it is miserable with rain. Everybody freaks out when it rains around here. It took me about half the normal time it takes to get into the office because people just clear out. They think it's Hurricane Katrina. But I have a lot of pride, and because I'm from Michigan, I'm like, this is nothing. So I've been wearing a scarf at my desk and trying to pretend like I'm not afraid of the outdoors. But here we are, and we got a lot of great stuff to cover. We've got big news coming out this week. And I brought some of the leading minds in the industry. One of them is the great Bryan Barletta from Sounds Profitable. And Bryan's going to talk to us a little bit about data and an announcement that we made last week and what the implications may be for the audio industry as we see it. And, you know, what is it that caused us to make such a earth-shattering move as to hire somebody as renowned as Nathan Aminian to come in and be our head of operations. Nathan has had a really important track record in this field. Doing some things with data that I think our industry has been hard pressed to do. And now he is in-house as a partner with us here at Oxford Road. And so we're going to talk about why did that happen and what does that mean? And so I have both Nathan and Bryan here with me today. By the way, Dan Granger, host and CEO of Oxford Road. And we're ready to begin. So welcome, Bryan, and welcome, Nathan. I'm really glad to have you both here on this, what it will be released on a Wednesday, but it's currently just a very rainy Monday.
Thanks for having me.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to talk about the all of the information and implications with attribution and data analysis and all that. But before we do, I think because this is the Media Roundtable and audio is so important to all of us, we should just take a moment and talk about the news that's come out with Joe Rogan. There's been a lot of speculation over the last few months about, is he going to stay with Spotify? Are we going to see him pop up on X? Is he talking to other players? Will he show up at Amazon? Where is he going to land? And news just came out that he has extended his stay with Spotify. And the really verifiable update that I think has implications on this is that the main change that we should expect going forward is they're no longer going to gate his content for Spotify users only. It is now going to be available across platforms. So this is a big thing for our industry. And before getting to anything else, I just want to get some hot takes on this. Bryan, I know you have already published on this subject between you and Tom, but can you talk a little bit about, you know, what does this mean for anybody and what does it mean for everybody?
Well, I mean, yeah, Tom posted something on Threads. We can share the link as well. But the idea generally was we need to examine the fact that Joe Rogan is the #1 podcaster by multiples. I believe it's almost double-digit multiples of the #2 podcaster. Like, the gap is so large there. He's identified a clear audience and he is something to them. How do people take that mindset and apply it to the other audiences out there? And what can we learn from that? I really like that post. But as you were talking through it, it really reminded me of something here. You know, I was at Megaphone helping build out the ad server and the data pipeline, worked very closely with the Megaphone targeted marketplace at the time. And that sales component was really strong and powerful, right? Being able to sell across so many different shows everywhere and being competent at it. Spotify acquired Megaphone and took that in. And for a while there, they pushed that streaming ad insertion. Their in-app audio ad solution was the only answer. It's why they made so many things exclusive. They were able to raise the price on it. There was more accurate data. And it really just dawned on me. Last year, we kind of moved away from arguing about the value of the download and ad delivery. It's here, it's worthwhile. We know how to do what we need to do with it, and we're improving it as an industry. And this move to go wider here, to me, says Spotify backs that. Spotify backs the download, the ad impression, or the ad delivered. And streaming ad insertion is a nice to have, but it's not going to give them 50% higher CPM. It's not going to win more advertisers in. Podcasting has done that. So the value of Joe Rogan choosing to still reference himself as a podcaster, he's big enough that he could drop that and it would hurt us as an industry, I think, volume-wise, size-wise, attention-wise, more than it would hurt him. but choosing to continue representing himself as a podcaster and being available to buy those ads through Spotify is really awesome. Like, I think that that's a really big win for the core format of podcast hosting and advertising.
And what do you think it means in terms of the reach of a program? If you were gated behind Spotify for Spotify users only, what do you think that's going to do to his total reach?
There's a non-insignificant number of people that consume just the clips of Joe Rogan on YouTube right now and consider themselves avid Joe Rogan podcast fans. So these people will immediately go from a series of 5 to 10 minute clips, multiple of them per episode, to 3 hour long episodes, right? So that means that there's more opportunity for them to come across more advertisements. There's more opportunity for them to experience more of the show, share more of the show, and not feel like if they share it, they have to drive people to Spotify, which Spotify, most people have Spotify, especially in the circles that I feel like we're in. I also have Apple Music too, Amazon Music, all these things. But that was a blocker for a lot of people. I think that I think Joe Rogan is going to have a even bigger reach than we have seen before. I think
no doubt. But do you think it's a 3x, a 4x, a 5x? How much bigger does it get?
I mean, 2x alone would be ridiculous, right?
That'd be
even 2x would be, I think that if he even does 50% more than where he is, it's going to be astounding, right? How much more is that audience? What is, especially when the focus, as Tom put it, is he's really speaking to a lot of disenfranchised men. That's his core audience. If we find out that there's 3x more of them, I think there's a bigger issue overall that we have to deal with here. But I think we'll see some pretty notable growth, and I think even 10 or 20% growth is still massive numbers wise. And that growth is bigger than some of the next 9 biggest podcasts.
For sure. Yeah. As Rogan goes, I think a lot of things in the industry go, and certainly I think we've watched the pendulum swing back and forth on whether or not they were going to wall off content platforms, were going to wall off their content or not. And I think at least for the next few years, this pretty much settles it. Everything's going to be open in the ecosystem. Were you surprised by the news?
I had heard rumor that it didn't work out financially for them the first time around, but to me, this says it does. I don't think that with Spotify cost cutting and making the decisions that they have, that holding on to this as a sales opportunity, there has to be value for Joe to not go on his own. I don't think he would struggle to sell his own inventory. So there's a financial commitment there that seems to be making it worthwhile. I wasn't super surprised the closer he came to it, especially with Call Her Daddy, 3 days beforehand, 2 days beforehand went live too. I think it was a smart move to immediately jump on that instead of give room for speculation. But yeah, I think there was a long time where I was not expecting that to be the case. I'm happy that Spotify is still actively in here being a driving force in the space. I think we still need titans like that here.
And Nathan, from your point of view, do you have a take on this, and were you surprised by the announcement?
I wasn't necessarily surprised. I think that it's very clear that consumption will go up. We know that there's listenership within podcasts and audio outside of Spotify, obviously, and they're aiming to capitalize on that. I think that beyond the obvious that, consumption will go higher, I think that show length was generally a blocker from people to, consume media. When you see an episode going upwards of 3 hours, it's somewhat daunting, and it influences advertisers as well in terms of, spot types, where to position them within episodes and so forth. And now that it's going to be available everywhere and potentially in bite-sized chunks, similar to what Bryan mentioned on YouTube, for example, it's going to influence how we look at advertising and our planning. I think when you look at, longer length shows like 3 hours, we assume that a longer ad length is more appropriate. And this might change things because consumption on different hosted platforms varies widely as well. We've seen that, and it's proven.
And it doesn't hurt that we're gonna have the advantage of Spotify with the biggest podcasts out there kind of help figure out the math of what people will accept for how you blend these different formats, right? Like, what is the CPM and the value of an ad on a clip versus the full video episode on YouTube versus the full video episode server side inserted by Spotify on that side, or whatever, right? Like, or the audio aspect, like, what's the difference between an on Spotify and off Spotify impression? Nobody today can figure out the right blend for simulcast. Even when you start separating out YouTube fully, you'll buy both of them, but they're different priced and different creatives. Having something so big help make that decision. We're going to see buyer tolerance. You guys will be front row in that to see what you will and won't pay for, and then that will help shape what you ask for too.
Yeah. Well, there's going to be a lot of implications, and I think you're starting to, this conversation is starting to bleed into the core conversation. But let me just cap off the Rogan piece to say this. I got a few calls in the fourth quarter last year from journalists trying to get speculation on this. My statement was I didn't think he had a reason to go anywhere. And, you have Spotify being the largest audio focused in the group, and you have Rogan being the guy with the reach. And we have precedent, regardless of what you think of any of these shows. You had Rush Limbaugh stay with Premiere for many decades, and they were able to hold that relationship in place. And they were the leaders in syndication. When satellite radio launched, they got Howard Stern. He's still there today, and now we're a couple decades later. I think at some point you get to a size where there's a lot more downside in taking on a risk of switching partners than upside.
Yes.
And the fact that they were able, I don't know Rogan personally well, but what I do know is that I think that he wants people to leave him alone and stay out of his way from a programming standpoint. And the fact that when he had all of the backlash in 2022 that he had, I mean, he was a lead story before Ukraine nationally outside of our industry, and they backed him. They stood by him and, didn't dictate to him how to run his business the way he wanted to. And so that made me think, yeah, he's not going anywhere. Yeah. So
the last thing, I just want to jump on one quick. I think that the biggest part of having this conversation, the hardest part for people, and they need to accept this, is that there are major podcasts like Rogan, the Daily Wire and stuff like that you may not agree with.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with the size and how they work as a business, right? The content and that aspect is one thing, and we need, it's good to have strong opinions about that, but these are large podcast companies, and we need to talk about them as large podcast companies or large entities in the space, separate the two conversations, because this is a big deal regardless of what people think about his content.
Completely. And we get into all that when we're talking brand safety and suitability, but that's for another episode at another time when we have Bryan longer. Bryan's going to leave us soon here. So I want to get to the issue du jour, which is Nathan. And let me just set the table with this. Nathan's been in this industry for a bit. I was actually surprised at how many people reached out when they saw the news that he was coming over, because they know that he's made a significant impact well before joining us in the field. And what's interesting is that if you listen to anything I've been saying over the last, 12 months, I've really been focusing on the fact that this is still a relationship business. It's a business that's about trust and personal relationships. And I think above all else, that has to be the core, is the relationship an audience has with a host and their ability to produce a conversation that is conducive to recommendations from the host about other things the audience might want to do, like use products and services that they believe in. That's, to me, why audio is audio and why it's powerful and why we're all so excited about this thing. It's not as transactional as everything else. And even as we move toward an AI world and things get more efficient and humans are not needed for everything that they were before, that it has to be people first. It has to be people first and relationship first. That being said, there's a whole nother side of this, and it is a business. And any company, whether you're a tech startup that somehow just got a Series A, if they're still doing that sort of thing in the Silicon Valley, or whether you're a global brand that has that's really has a multi-generational marketing strategy. If you're serious about your work, you're going to have a way to measure the outcomes. You're going to look at the correlation between dollars out and dollars in. And I see that across nobody gets to escape from that unless they're being negligent. I know we work in a slice of an influencer ecosystem where people are still buying deals on a page with no metrics to back it up whatsoever. And that's nice for them to do for now. They'll get here eventually. But for now, we have to live in a world that is not only influential, it has to be able to, you have to show the receipts and you have to have a scoreboard. And in the fragmented world that we're in, and with the speed at which technology is changing, and we just watched it exponentially increase in the last 12 months, we all have to be ready for that. And I don't care if you are a brand, you are a publisher, you are a competitor of Oxford Road. Like, if you haven't already, you need to wake up and you need to understand that things are moving very quickly. And for us to be able to keep up with the changes in the marketplace, we have to be competitive with our data. And so we wanted to bring in somebody who is an established player in the field that could help make sure that we are perpetually in a state of retrofitting all of our operations, from the dashboards that an advertiser sees on their performance down to our P&L and how we run finance at this company. The data needs to agree, it needs to talk to each other, it needs to connect. And Nathan is now central to the nervous system. His influence is not just about showing reports to clients. It's about the way that we run our whole business. So this was a really important move for us. And I think the market is seeing that. And Bryan, you being one of the more inquisitive and knowledgeable people in the space, I wanted, since we were talking about it anyway, I wanted to have you on to just, throw out what this brings to mind for you and any questions you have, because I think a lot of people, whatever side of the industry you're sitting on, can gain something by seeing the way that we're thinking about these types of issues.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this stood out to me because the emphasis you guys had on analytics, data attribution, and all of that, especially as we're in 2024, because it's easy to look at, I mean, even in the 4 years, almost 4 years that Sounds Profitable has been out, like we've been talking about it. I mean, that's where I cut my teeth in a lot of this podcast space, attribution from vendors. I don't know if I've heard from a vendor that you haven't worked with or have a perspective on. This seems so interesting to me because you have access to all of them, you work with all of them directly. Nathan, I guess this is to you, Nathan, like, what's your goal with that? Like, are we still in an environment where you can rest on one vendor to answer all your problems? Or are you guys envisioning something that's unique to Oxford Road and more agencies should do to kind of pull everything together and have your own view?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think generally speaking, we want to significantly reduce our dependency on vendors. As you mentioned, we work with a host of them, and we have our tried and true vendors that, are back tested and proven, that we work with quite a bit. But, most of these vendors have their own limitations, but their limitations are more out of the box. And if you do some more digging and customization, we can get more data out of them and more capabilities. And that's something that, we're aiming to do here. Lowering dependency on vendors by, building our own tracking components, for example, with the objective of capturing additional data points beyond the standard fields that make up the common denominator of most networks and attribution models today, like a user agent, IP address, for example, and building a customized solution that pushes to find more commonalities in data among networks and stitching them together one by one. It's obviously a pretty significant undertaking for us here, but it's important in the long run. And when you think about media mix modeling and so forth, although there are complications with data that's available to us, irrespective of those attribution challenges, we can't necessarily lose sight of how media is consumed, and that is a multi-channel reality, and we need to continuously develop our models around that, no matter the lack of insight that we get from these mediums moving forward. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I'm right there with you. You mentioned media mix modeling, and I would just kind of want to jump in there too. I feel like God, I've been in ad tech for 15 years. I absolutely remember walking into the room and social and search people while we were trying to pitch them media mix modeling are just like, why are we here? We don't have to fit in this, right? And now they do, right? They figured it out. Podcasting has kind of been that. Like I don't think anybody has raised their hand and said this is exactly how podcasting fits in there. Is this the year? Are we going to see that? Are you expecting that? Or are you expecting the pressure to solve that?
Well, it's interesting because, as we see with our host of clients, quite a bit of them, even prospects, they're still living in more of a heroistic model approach, where they're kind of determining a first touch, last touch, multi-touch model that is somewhat not necessarily data driven, but it's an individual within the organization that is determined, which approach they're going to take. And, as we know with our wealth of knowledge within audio, this audio is pretty well known for being a higher funnel channel. There's an example that I have where I worked with a very large advertiser in the past that ran a comprehensive study. And, within their survey, they asked their customers, where was the channel that you first heard about our brand? And it was predominantly audio. And, on the flip side, they asked, what was the last channel you heard about our brand before making a purchase? And, 9 times out of 10, it was social. So right off the bat, if, we're working with a last touch model that obviously works in favor of social and against audio. So we have to shift away from a heuristic approach to more of a data-driven approach. And while we have all this data at our fingertips, we need to take advantage of that because we can build insights and it'll help drive our models moving forward as that data starts diminishing over time.
Yeah, and this goes back to the first thing about all the different vendors and the unique perspective, right? What I like about this is that there's no environment where one of the podcast focused attribution vendors is going to be the sole solution for a media mix approach for one of your clients, right? Or rather all of your clients. So being able, not having to pull just that one vendor in, but being able to take that data in and utilize it yourself to make it work for that client. I felt like with the lack of any one vendor, let's say winning majority share. I mean, most of them are in the single digits to low double digit for percent of like total downloads or total episodes rather released. What are we expecting that more customized approach? Are we expecting to take first party data and work with that client directly, and instead of taking something kind of off the shelf, and which thing you take off the shelf, really devising a unique strategy for podcasting for all of your clients? Is that the future you're looking at?
Let me jump in for just a second. I would say, listen, first things first, the goal is not to fire all our vendors and rebuild everything ourselves, right? So, but that being said, like, it's really, really important for everybody in this field to look at who we are dependent on. And if we don't have checks and balances, if we don't have the ability to compare, or, in the case of attribution, it's just been like kissing a frog after kissing a frog after kissing a frog. Everybody's working hard on this. Everybody's trying to solve it. But until there is like a clear best way to do something, we want to have options. And I think what happens when you're a service business is you become very, very dependent on your technical partners. And so you can't even necessarily do the comparison of buy versus build. When you have talent like Nathan involved, you can actually do that analysis before you decide, what you're going to license or continue to license from third parties. But it's nice to have the option. It's nice to know that that's always on the table, right? So I can let Nathan speak more deeply to the question, but just from an approach standpoint, if you're shopping vendors and you realize that you're not sure any of them are going to get you what you want, it sure is nice to have a third pathway at your disposal. And I think that's a big part of what is important to us as well.
Well, even like using that vendor, even that vendor being the solution, I often think about agencies and the role of an agency. Like if I'm a buyer or I'm a brand and I'm working with you, I either want you to kick all the data directly to me, or I'd rather log into one place. If you pick a vendor and we're working together and that vendor stops working for you and you have to switch me to another vendor, that now I have to log in somewhere different, or we have different ones for different sides. A world where I can log into one place owned by you and you on the back end can pick the right solution for me. That's not
Yes.
discrediting the vendor, that's giving better service for all your clients, right? Like that excites me, because when we started attribution at Barometric before Claritas acquired us, like it used to be a PowerPoint presentation from a data scientist explaining the results of the campaign. It wasn't something as straightforward as a dashboard because there was more nuance to it. It wasn't 50 conversions. It was 5% lift over baseline. And what does that mean compared to all your other media? It feels like we went too far into plug it in and it's directional and maybe you can guess those exact numbers. And now we're getting back to it's not as clear as that. And you need to look at it deeper and we need to have a conversation and you need to see the data in the way you want to process it.
Well, and that's exactly right. And it's really important to distinguish that some partners are better for some solutions than others, right?
Yeah.
And our clients have different needs. They have different restrictions and limitations on what and how they can even measure. And so having the ability to be compatible with all the different solutions that are out there, that alone is critical. So you don't get too boxed in.
Yeah. Nathan, what are your thoughts on first party data? I mean, it's, it's February 5th when we're recording here. To say that I probably had 50 conversations about first party data and podcasting so far this year would probably be underselling it. It seems like a major focus for this year, or at least buyers seem to be interested in it. What are you hearing about it? What are your thoughts on how it can fit in?
It's absolutely important, and we hear that directly from clients. I think something that we need to keep in mind is as we build out and fine tune our solutions as experts, we also have to keep in mind that clients and advertisers have their own internal solutions that they're leaning on, and they're not just looking at audio as an isolated channel, but rather what does that look like folded in with their entire media mix. And that's something that as an audio agency we might not necessarily have ownership of, but rather the advertiser themselves are running that internally. So we, like Dan said, we need to have the ability to bend where we can and adhere to advertisers' approach as well. But first party data is something that they're leveraging internally, and we need to be able to fold ours into that.
Yeah. And this is why I'm excited about Oxford Road hiring you joining the team, right? Is because without someone to look over this type of relationship, what you have is just sending the data, right? They want first party data. They want to do their own attribution. They want to do that. That's easy. We can absolutely do that. There's a handful of vendors who can send the data over. There's a handful of pixel solutions that will get them the necessary data. But if we send it over to them without conversation, without our opinion on weighting, on our expertise in podcasting to influence their overall model and how we're represented in it, the offer to sit in the room with them and work on that and improve it, it's a black box, right? It's throwing it over there and hoping that they see the same things we do. And at the end of the day, we're so far removed from that person who received the data that they don't care about podcasting. If it messes up their math, why would they go out on a limb for us? So this role, I see this as being a critical part of agencies and buyers going forward in podcasting, a real focus on data and analytics. In the same way that we need the chief audio officers, data and analytics is not something to sleep on either.
It is certainly not. I had no idea before we started doing these events. I mean, it's just like people could talk forever about it. It is without a doubt the largest slice of the pie of advertiser concern. And it doesn't really matter what industry or size of brand. It all starts with measurement, right?
Yeah, that's a big part of what we do in the download, right? Is we're trying to show those concerns in other spaces so that you understand that it's important that we solve it here, but like they're still fighting over TV measurement, radio measurement, CTV is the new hot one on all these things, retail media, all of those spaces, nobody is completely confident in it because it's not exact. It's not one-to-one unless you buy a walled garden. And even then, some things are vague.
And also we have to consider that, in a typical, in an ideal world, there's a ground truth to compare it to, right? But we don't necessarily have that. No one does.
Yeah.
So, you can back test all you want, but you don't necessarily have that ground truth to compare to. So it's a science and an art, and we have to roll with that. And you nailed it earlier, Bryan, that there's nuance in this world, and it's hard for an advertiser to accept that per se. Like an advertiser that like a mattress dealer, for example, the purchase consideration window for that is very wide. It could be 9 to 12 months. And if audio was the channel that introduced the brand to them, and they convert months later, it's difficult to show that nuance to an advertiser.
Yeah,
But it played a part in the conversion.
there was an iHeart case study about that with in-store traffic. I think it was sometime last year, and it was really interesting on it, and how many different pieces and components that had to go in that don't necessarily fit in the media mix model, that won't look good on a simple dashboard on a platform, that really needed a nuanced conversation. But it was incredibly valuable to show how influential podcasting was on that purchase.
Well, so, I think to put a bow around the thing, we're very excited about this. And I think if anybody wants to, figure out, well, what does that mean for me? I think one of the messages here is that everything is connected, right? Our brand safety and suitability data, our performance data, media data, financial data, all of these things, they need to talk to each other, and you have to have the right infrastructure and the right hygiene from the very core of the organization. And then from that, there's a world of automation and data analysis that can be done, as well as additional tools that can be developed. But it all starts from having that done from the ground up. And if anybody is not feeling confident in your current position, I would treat this as a, both urgent and important to do something quickly. And we're just very grateful for Nathan. And the last thing I'll say is this, we're talking technical stuff here, or at least you guys are. I try to fake it. But the big thing anytime we're bringing in somebody new to the company, I think you have to look at character first. And who you are hiring is at least as much of a consideration as what they are able to do with the knowledge that's in their heads. And Nathan is somebody who, let's just say, we had a very tight alignment of values. We want the same things. We want to treat our partners and our clients the same way. And it's making for a very beautiful collaboration that's now in real time helping our organization and our clients. So thanks for your interest in that.
Yeah, I'm pumped to be part of Highlight in this, because I think it's a really important thing. I think this will be just the first of many people in the space hiring a similar role with a similar focus. So
for sure. All right, well, thank you, Bryan, and thank you, Nathan, for giving us something to announce. We are going to wrap here and just say that this podcast is still brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and to use your influence for good. If you're a marketer and you're looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, go to our website, oxfordroad.com, subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. Bryan, you subscribe to The Influencer, don't you?
I do.
Of course you do. And if you want to give us feedback, it is the Breakfast to Champions. Hit us up at info@mediaroundtable.com, and we will take your feedback to heart. Somebody was giving me a lot of grief last week about my poor audio quality, so I fixed the audio quality. Bianca actually fixed it, but here we are. We listen, we respond. And don't forget to listen to Ad Infinitum, the Creative Focus podcast hosted by our very own Stu Redwine, head of creative. Special thanks to Bianca, Kyle, Haley, Scott, Mary Jane, Everett, and the team at Podcast One. And as always, influence responsibly.